Guess we gotta catch it before the YouTube start fucking up in the afternoon. So in the afternoon, I get to spend time with my first lady, my UK correspondent. You know what I'm saying? And I make some videos during the day. Jordan just sent me a track. Nice motherfucking track too. So after this, I'm gonna work on that. Probably take another nap, then wake up and work on it again. You already know how it is. It's still early. But this is every esoteric law you were never taught. Explained in 30 minutes. We ain't gonna be here long. Let's get this shit on popping. These are the esoteric laws you were never taught. Welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays. Also, Winging It Wednesdays and Happy Hump Day. Let's get it.
The law of sacred delay. This states that not everything arrives when you want it to, because timing is part of the lesson. Delay is not denial, punishment, or bad luck. It is a refining process that prepares both the person and the outcome to meet at the right moment. Most people assume that faster is better. This law explains why rushing often creates fragile results. When something arrives before you're ready to hold it, it becomes overwhelming, misused, or lost. Sacred delay allows capacity to grow alongside desire. This law often appears as waiting periods that feel frustrating or unnecessary. Plans stall, progress slows. Opportunities almost happen but don't fully land. On the surface, it feels like nothing is moving. Internally, however, alignment is forming. Beliefs are adjusting. Emotional stability is developing. Perspective is maturing. Sacred delay also protects you from outcomes that would harm you if they arrive too soon. What you want may be real, but the version of you asking for it may not yet be stable, disciplined, or clear enough to sustain it. Delay gives time for identity to catch up with intention. This law explains why lessons repeat during waiting periods. If impatience, doubt, or resentment keep surfacing, the delay continues. Once the lesson is integrated, movement resumes naturally. The law of perceptual limitation. This states that reality can only be understood through the level of awareness a person currently has. You don't see the world as it is, you see it as you are. Perception is filtered through beliefs, emotional maturity, experience, and consciousness. This law explains why the same situation produces completely different meanings for different people. What feels like an opportunity to one person feels like a threat to another. It's not because reality changes, but because perception does. Awareness determines interpretation. Perceptual limitation also explains why certain truths feel invisible until the right moment. Advice that once sounded useless suddenly makes sense later in life. Lessons repeat until the mind has expanded enough to recognize them. Understanding is unlocked by readiness, not information. This law operates quietly in personal growth. People often believe they lack clarity, when in reality they lack capacity. Until perception expands, deeper insight cannot land without distortion. Forcing understanding too early creates confusion instead of wisdom. Perceptual limitation also protects the psyche. If all truths were revealed at once, the mind would be overwhelmed. Awareness expands gradually, revealing only what can be integrated without harm. What you cannot yet perceive is not hidden, it is withheld for stability. This law explains conflict and misunderstanding. People argue not because one is evil and the other is right, but because they are operating from different perceptual levels. Communication fails when awareness is mismatched. The law of stillness. This states that clarity, insight, and correct action emerge only when movement pauses. Stillness is not inactivity. It is the suspension of noise, reaction, and constant mental motion so deeper awareness can surface. Most people try to solve problems through more thinking, more effort, and more action. This law explains why that often makes things worse. When the mind is overstimulated, perception narrows, stillness widens it. What feels confusing in motion becomes obvious in quiet. Stillness often appears naturally during moments of exhaustion, silence, or emotional pause. Life slows you down when forward motion is no longer productive. These moments feel uncomfortable because they remove distraction, forcing you to face what has been avoided. This law also explains why important realizations happen unexpectedly, in the shower, during a walk, or in moments of silence. When mental pressure drops, awareness reorganizes itself. Insight is not created, it is revealed. Stillness is essential before correct action. Acting without stillness leads to reaction, impulse, and repetition. Acting after stillness leads to precision. The law of unconscious sacrifice states that when you're sitting around Googling how to make money on the internet and your ass is tired of being broke, let me tell you what your parents...
Start a revolution.
Acting after stillness leads to precision. The law of unconscious sacrifice states that what you refuse to give up consciously will eventually be taken from you unconsciously. Life demands balance, and when attachment becomes rigid, sacrifice happens without permission. Most people think sacrifice is always a choice. This law explains why it often isn't. When someone clings to comfort, identity, habits, or relationships that no longer align with their growth, pressure builds quietly. Eventually, something breaks. The loss feels sudden, but the sacrifice was accumulating over time. Unconscious sacrifice often appears as unexpected loss. A relationship ends abruptly. A job collapses. Health declines. Motivation disappears. These events feel random, but they usually target what a person was unwilling to release voluntarily. This law is not punishment. It is correction. Growth requires space, and space is created either through conscious letting go or forced removal. When awareness is avoided, life acts on your behalf. The law of energetic inheritance. This states that people inherit more than genetics, culture, or environment. They also inherit emotional patterns, beliefs, fears, coping mechanisms, and unresolved tensions from those who came before them. What was not processed is passed forward. This law explains why certain struggles appear without a clear personal origin. You may feel guilt, fear, scarcity, anger, or self-doubt that doesn't match your life experience. These patterns are often energetic remnants of family history, collective trauma, or long-standing belief systems. Energetic inheritance doesn't mean you are doomed to repeat the past. It means you are positioned where unfinished patterns surface. Awareness turns inheritance into choice. Without awareness, the pattern continues unconsciously through behavior, relationships, and decisions. The same conflicts, addictions, emotional wounds, or life themes reappear across generations, even when circumstances change. The story evolves, but the emotional core stays the same until someone becomes conscious enough to interrupt it. Energetic inheritance often hides behind the phrase, "This is just how I am." In reality, many traits are learned adaptations rather than true identity. Once recognized, these patterns lose authority. What was inherited does not have to be carried forever. People who work through energetic inheritance often feel like cycle breakers. Their path feels heavier at first, but lighter later. They carry awareness instead of repetition. The law of voluntary difficulty. This states that consciously chosen challenges accelerate growth more effectively than comfort ever can. When difficulty is selected willingly, it strengthens awareness, discipline, and self-trust instead of breaking them. This law explains why people who choose hard paths often grow faster than those who avoid discomfort. Voluntary difficulty builds capacity. It trains the nervous system, sharpens focus, and expands tolerance for pressure. What is chosen strengthens. What is forced traumatizes. There is a key difference between suffering and voluntary difficulty. Suffering feels chaotic and disempowering. Voluntary difficulty is intentional. You decide to wake earlier, train harder, practice restraint, study longer, or face fear directly. The challenge is the same, but the relationship to it changes everything. When life becomes too easy, awareness dulls, discipline erodes. Voluntary difficulty reintroduces friction in a controlled way, keeping perception sharp and identity strong. In esoteric traditions, initiates were often given deliberate trials, fasting, silence, isolation, discipline, not to punish them, but to prepare them. Chosen hardship builds inner authority. It teaches the mind and body that discomfort is survivable and meaningful. Voluntary difficulty also prevents unconscious suffering. When you regularly choose challenge, life has less reason to force lessons through crisis. Conscious effort reduces the need for chaotic correction. Those who live by this law don't seek pain, but they don't avoid it either. They understand that ease without effort leads to stagnation, while difficulty with purpose leads to expansion. The law of integration. This states that insight alone does not create change. Understanding must be
Salute, Pete
absorbed,
Moses.
embodied, and lived before it becomes stable. What is not
Salute.
integrated remains theoretical and eventually fades or collapses under pressure. This law explains why people can read, watch, or learn powerful ideas, yet return to old patterns. Awareness without integration stays in the mind, not the system. Until a lesson is applied emotionally, mentally, and behaviorally, it does not become part of who you are. Integration happens slowly and quietly. It shows up as changed reactions, calmer responses, clearer boundaries, and different choices. You don't announce integration, you demonstrate it. When something is integrated, you no longer need to remind yourself of it. It becomes automatic. The law of inner permission. This states that nothing truly changes in a person's life until they internally allow it. External effort, opportunities, or support cannot override an unconscious refusal. Growth, healing, success, or movement forward all require inner consent before they can stabilize. Inner permission is rarely spoken out loud. It appears as quiet agreement. It is the moment someone decides internally what they believe is possible, allowed, or inevitable for them. Once permission is granted, resistance weakens and reality begins to respond. Decisions feel clearer. Action feels less forced. This law explains why people can want change deeply and still remain stuck. On the surface, they desire growth, peace, or progress. Beneath that desire may be fear of responsibility, loss of identity, or uncertainty. Without inner permission, effort feels exhausting and inconsistent because the system is divided. When inner permission is granted in a healthy way, momentum often follows quickly. A person allows themselves to succeed, to rest, to leave, to speak, or to try again. The outer world doesn't suddenly change, but it responds differently because the inner block has been removed. However, this law also has a shadow side. Inner permission can be given unconsciously to limiting or harmful states. This doesn't happen through choice, but through resignation. Thoughts like, this is just who I am, nothing will
Salute,
change,
Lord.
or this is how life is for me, are not neutral observations. They are permissions.
Salute.
In this state, conditions like depression, hopelessness, or withdrawal are not created by permission, but maintained by it. The nervous system adapts. Low energy becomes familiar. Avoidance becomes safe. What is tolerated long enough becomes normalized. The danger is that unconscious permission feels like acceptance. People mistake giving up for peace. They stop questioning the state they're in, and over time, that state solidifies into identity. The shift from this is what I'm experiencing to this is what I am happens quietly, but powerfully. This does not mean pain should be suppressed or denied. Feeling sadness, exhaustion, or grief is not the problem. The problem begins when someone decides those states are permanent, deserved, or unchangeable. That decision is where permission locks in. The law of initiation. This is one of the least talked about esoteric laws because it doesn't feel mystical when you're inside it. It feels confusing, lonely, and sometimes unfair. But at its core, this law explains why real growth never happens comfortably. The law of initiation states that before a person can access a higher level of awareness, power, or responsibility, they must first pass through a period of testing and inner transformation. Initiation is not a ritual or a secret ceremony. Those are just symbols. Real initiation happens in real life. It shows up as moments where your old identity stops working. Things you relied on begin to fall apart. You feel disconnected from who you used to be, but you're not yet sure who you're becoming. This in-between state is not a mistake. It's the beginning of initiation. The first stage of initiation is separation. This is when life starts removing what no longer fits your next level. Relationships change. Old habits lose their grip. Comfort fades. You may feel lost, abandoned, or misunderstood. But what's really happening is that you're being detached from an outdated version of yourself. You can't step into something new while still clinging to what you've already outgrown. The second stage is the trial. This is the hardest part. There's confusion, silence, and pressure. Guidance disappears. Signs stop showing up. You're forced to rely on your own judgment instead of external validation. This stage tests your integrity, patience, and self-trust. Many people fail here, not because they're weak, but because they try to escape the discomfort instead of learning from it. The final stage is integration. If you endure the trial without betraying yourself, something shifts. You don't suddenly feel powerful or enlightened. Instead, you feel steady. You react less emotionally. You stop chasing approval. You understand yourself better. The reward of initiation isn't status or recognition. It's clarity, inner alignment, and quiet confidence. Initiation feels personal because it is. Each person's initiation targets their deepest fear, strongest attachment, or biggest illusion. That's why no two initiations look the same. What pushes one person forward might break another. Life designs the test specifically for the individual. Initiation is promotion. It's life preparing you to carry more responsibility without losing yourself in the process. The law of silence teaches that true power, clarity, and transformation grow in quiet, not noise. In esoteric understanding, silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's the absence of unnecessary expression. The more something is still forming, the less it wants to be spoken about. Most people think talking makes things real. This law says the opposite. Talking too early weakens energy. When you speak before something is stable, you expose it to doubt, interference, and external influence. Silence protects what is still becoming. This is why periods of growth often feel quiet. When someone is truly changing, they usually stop explaining themselves. They stop announcing plans. They stop arguing, not because they have nothing to say, but because they're conserving energy. Silence is how inner work is sealed. The law of silence also explains why guidance disappears during important phases of life. When you're being initiated into a higher level of awareness, the noise fades. Advice feels unhelpful. Signs become rare. This isn't abandonment, it's training. Silence forces you to listen inward instead of constantly seeking direction outside yourself. There's also a psychological side to this law. When you talk excessively, you leak emotional energy. Complaining, over-explaining, defending yourself, or constantly sharing your plans keeps you stuck in reaction mode. Silence interrupts that cycle. It creates space for observation instead of impulse. In many esoteric traditions, initiates were sworn to silence for a reason, not to hide secrets, but to protect understanding. Knowledge that is spoken without embodiment becomes empty. Silence allows wisdom to mature before it's expressed. This law doesn't mean you should never speak. It means you should speak intentionally. Words are tools. Silence is a container. Without silence, words lose weight. Without silence, intention scatters. The law of inner alignment.
6 years old, and this is my 5-minute makeup routine.
I've learned something in my 40s. I don't need more products. I just need the right.
This states that life responds not to what you say you want, but to what you are internally. Without silence, words lose weight. Without silence, intention scatters. The law of inner alignment. This states that life responds not to what you say you want, but to what you are internally aligned with. Your outer reality reflects your dominant inner state, your beliefs, emotions, values, and self-image, not your intentions alone. Most people try to change outcomes without changing alignment. They chase goals while internally doubting themselves. They speak confidence while feeling fear. They desire growth while clinging to comfort. This creates friction. When your inner world and outer actions don't match, progress feels forced and unstable. Inner alignment happens when your thoughts, emotions, and actions point in the same direction. You don't just want something mentally, you believe it's possible, feel worthy of it, and act in ways that support it. When this alignment is present, effort feels lighter and resistance reduces. This law explains why some people achieve results quickly while others struggle despite working hard. It's not luck or talent, it's coherence. When your inner state supports your goal, reality stops pushing back. When it doesn't, life creates obstacles to expose the misalignment. Misalignment often shows up as exhaustion, procrastination, self-sabotage, or constant second-guessing. These aren't personal flaws, they're signals. They're telling you that something inside you doesn't fully agree with the direction you're moving. People who live in inner alignment move differently. They're calm under pressure. They make decisions faster. They don't need constant reassurance. Even when things don't work out, they recover quickly because their center is stable. The law of inner alignment teaches one core truth. When you align internally, the external follows naturally. You don't have to force life. You simply have to become coherent with what you're asking for. The law of focused will. This states that energy follows sustained intention, not scattered desire. What you repeatedly choose to direct your attention, effort, and decision-making toward is what gains strength in your life. Most people think willpower is about forcing results. In reality, will is about direction, not strain. When your will is unfocused, energy leaks. You want many things, pull in multiple directions, and end up feeling busy but stuck. Focused will concentrates energy into a single channel, allowing momentum to build. This law explains why consistency often beats talent. Someone with moderate ability but focused will outpace someone with high potential but scattered attention. Focus turns effort into pressure, and pressure turns intention into reality. Focused will requires choosing one priority at a time, not because other goals don't matter, but because divided will weakens results. Every time you shift focus impulsively, you reset progress. Depth always produces more than constant switching. The law of focused will teaches a simple truth. What you consistently commit your will to becomes unavoidable, not through force, but through sustained direction. The law of balance. This states that everything in life seeks equilibrium. Growth, power, emotion, ambition, and even spirituality must be balanced, or they eventually create instability. Most people think imbalance shows up as failure. In reality, it often shows up as excess. Too much work without rest leads to burnout. Too much control leads to rigidity. Too much detachment leads to emptiness. Balance is not about avoiding extremes, but about knowing when to counter them. This law explains why rapid success often comes with sudden collapse. When growth happens faster than emotional or mental capacity can handle, life applies pressure to restore balance. The correction may feel like loss, delay, or limitation, but its purpose is stabilization, not punishment. Balance also applies internally. When logic dominates emotion, intuition weakens. When emotion dominates logic, clarity disappears. When spirituality ignores practicality, life becomes unstable. Balance allows different aspects of the self to support each other instead of competing. The law of balance doesn't mean staying neutral or passive. It means adjusting intelligently. There are moments to push forward and moments to pause, moments to speak and moments to stay silent. Wisdom is knowing which is required. People who understand this law move with rhythm instead of force. They recover faster from stress. They don't overreact to success or failure. They know that extremes correct themselves, but awareness allows the correction to be gentle instead of destructive. The law of gender. This states that everything in existence carries both masculine and feminine principles. These are not about biological sex. They are energetic qualities that govern creation, movement, and expression in all things. The masculine principle represents direction, structure, logic, action, and will. It initiates, protects, and pushes forward. The feminine principle represents receptivity, intuition, creativity, emotion, and flow. It nurtures, receives, and transforms. Neither is superior. Creation requires both. This law explains why imbalance creates dysfunction. When the masculine dominates without the feminine, life becomes rigid, aggressive, and disconnected. When the feminine dominates without the masculine, life becomes chaotic, unfocused, and unstable. Harmony comes from cooperation, not dominance. In spiritual traditions, the union of masculine and feminine is considered a high state of consciousness. It represents inner wholeness, action guided by intuition, strength softened by awareness, and creativity supported by discipline. The law of transmutation. This states that energy is never destroyed, only transformed. Emotions, thoughts, experiences, and circumstances do not disappear. They change form. What you don't consciously transform will express itself unconsciously. Most people try to suppress unwanted emotions like fear, anger, pain, or desire. This law explains why that never works. Suppressed energy doesn't vanish. It leaks out as stress, self-sabotage, illness, or repeated patterns. Transmutation happens when energy is redirected, not resisted. In esoteric understanding, so-called negative emotions are not bad. They are raw energy. Fear contains alertness. Anger contains drive. Pain contains depth. When these energies are refined through awareness, discipline, and intention, they become fuel instead of obstacles. This law explains why pressure often precedes growth. Difficult experiences generate intense energy. If a person remains unconscious, that energy hardens into trauma. If they become aware, the same energy becomes strength, insight, or creative force. The difference is not the experience, but how it's processed. Transmutation requires presence. You cannot transform what you refuse to feel. Observing an emotion without reacting to it allows its form to change naturally. This is why many spiritual and psychological practices focus on awareness rather than control. The law of transmutation also applies to desire and ambition. Wanting something intensely is not a problem. The problem is fixation. When desire is refined, it becomes purpose. When obsession is refined, it becomes mastery. Energy always rises to the level of consciousness directing it. People who understand this law don't waste pain. They don't romanticize it either. They extract meaning, direction, and power from it. Over time, this creates emotional resilience and inner authority. The law of transmutation teaches a simple truth. You don't eliminate energy, you elevate it. What once pulled you down can become what moves you forward. The law of
Tom Ogle drove 200 miles on only 2 gallons of gasoline.
The law of intention. This states that outcomes are shaped not just by actions, but by the intention behind them. Two people can do the same thing, take the same steps, and put in the same effort, yet get completely different results because their inner motive is different. Most people confuse intention with desire. Desire is wanting something. Intention is deciding from within. It's the quiet agreement you make with yourself about why you're acting. Intention directs energy before action even begins. This law explains why forced effort often leads to burnout. When action is driven by fear, insecurity, or the need for approval, progress feels heavy. But when action is driven by clarity and purpose, effort feels lighter and more sustainable, even when the work is hard. Intention also shapes how reality responds to you. When your intention is aligned, opportunities appear more naturally. When your intention is conflicted, obstacles multiply. Life doesn't respond to what you say you want. It responds to what you're consistently reinforcing inside. Non-resistance. This is the practice of stopping the internal fight with reality. It doesn't mean you approve of what's happening, or that you become passive. It simply means you stop arguing, emotionally and mentally, with something that already exists. Most suffering doesn't come from events themselves, but from the tension created by thoughts like, this shouldn't be happening, or I need this to stop now. That inner push creates stress and keeps the experience stuck. When you stop resisting, the emotional charge around the situation begins to fade. You allow the feeling to be present without feeding it with fear, anger, or blame. Instead of reacting automatically, you create space to observe what's happening. In that space, clarity starts to return. You're no longer wasting energy fighting what already is. The paradox of non-resistance is that things often shift faster when you stop forcing them. Once the struggle drops, the situation loses the grip it had on you. From this calmer state, action becomes more effective because it's guided by awareness rather than panic or desperation. Non-resistance isn't weakness, it's quiet control. The law of containment. This is about how energy is held and managed internally. When emotions, intentions, or plans are constantly expressed, dramatized, or leaked outward, their power weakens. Energy that is scattered loses focus. Energy that is contained gains intensity. This is why oversharing, venting nonstop, or announcing goals too early often leads to burnout or stalled progress. The emotion feels released, but the momentum is lost. Containment doesn't mean repression. It means holding energy without letting it spill in uncontrolled ways. When you contain energy, it matures. Feelings settle, clarity increases, and action becomes more precise. Containment turns raw emotion into quiet strength. It's the difference between noise and presence, reaction and control. Fair exchange. This is the idea that nothing is truly free. Everything has a cost, even when it doesn't look like it. The catch is that the payment isn't always money or effort. Sometimes the currency is time, attention, peace of mind, integrity, or identity. When something feels too easy or free, the cost is often hidden and paid later. Most people don't choose whether they pay. They only choose where they pay unconsciously. You might gain comfort but pay with growth, gain status but pay with authenticity, or gain pleasure but pay with motivation. The exchange always balances, just not immediately, which is why it's easy to miss. Understanding fair exchange brings awareness to your choices. When you see the full cost of what you're accepting, you regain control. You can decide whether the trade is worth it instead of being surprised by the bill later. That's why this law feels uncomfortable. It makes responsibility unavoidable. The law of forgotten desire. This describes how fulfillment often arrives only after desire loosens its grip. When you obsess over wanting something, your attention stays fixed on the lack of it. That constant wanting keeps the mind and emotions tense, which subtly pushes the outcome away. As desire fades into the background through distraction, acceptance, or growth, the pressure dissolves. You stop checking, chasing, or measuring progress. In that relaxed state, actions become natural and unforced, and opportunities are easier to recognize. What you wanted no longer defines you. This law feels paradoxical, because it suggests that wanting less can lead to receiving more. It doesn't mean you stop caring entirely. It means the desire no longer controls your emotional state. When the attachment drops, space opens, and that's often when things finally arrive. Energetic consent. This is the idea that nothing truly stays in your life without some level of inner agreement. Even when things seem forced or random, they usually persist because there is an unconscious yes somewhere inside, a belief, fear, identity, or emotional pattern that allows it. This consent isn't always conscious. It can come from conditioning, low self-worth, unhealed trauma, or familiar emotional states. You might say you want change on the surface, but internally you may still be aligned with what's happening because it feels known, safe, or confirms a story about who you are. When that inner agreement is withdrawn, patterns start to dissolve naturally. You don't have to fight everything externally. You change what you tolerate, identify with, or emotionally invest in. Energetic consent shifts the focus from blame to awareness, which is why it's uncomfortable but powerful. Inversion. This is the principle that reality often responds in the opposite way you expect when you're emotionally attached to an outcome. The harder you chase something, the more it tends to pull away. The more you try to control people, situations, or results, the more resistance you create. This happens because intense desire usually carries fear, fear of loss, fear of not having enough, fear of not being enough. That fear tightens your behavior and energy, making your actions feel desperate or forced. Even when you're doing the right things, the emotional pressure behind them pushes the outcome in the opposite direction. When you relax your grip, things often move toward you instead. Detachment doesn't mean indifference. It means acting without anxiety about the result. Inversion teaches that allowing can be more powerful than pursuing, and that calm alignment attracts what force cannot. The law of power vacuum. This states that when you don't consciously direct your life, something else will step in to do it for you. Power never stays empty. If you avoid making choices, setting boundaries, or claiming responsibility, that unused authority gets filled by people, systems, habits, fear, or circumstance. This is why passivity often leads to control rather than freedom. When you don't decide what matters, external pressures decide for you. Work, relationships, culture, trauma, or expectations begin to shape your direction, not because they're stronger, but because the space was left open. The law isn't about domination, it's about ownership. Reclaiming power doesn't mean forcing outcomes. It means choosing consciously instead of drifting. Once you take responsibility for your inner authority, the vacuum closes, and outside forces lose their grip. Chaos entry. This is the point where order breaks down before real change can begin. It's the moment when old beliefs, routines, identities, or certainties stop working, and life starts to feel unstable, confusing, or out of control. Most people see this as failure or punishment, but esoterically, it's a necessary doorway. When structure collapses, awareness is forced to expand. You can no longer rely on autopilot, habits, or borrowed answers. This creates discomfort, but it also opens space for something new. Growth rarely enters through comfort. It enters through disruption. Chaos shakes loose what was rigid and outdated. The danger of chaos entry is trying to escape it too quickly. When people rush to restore the old order, they miss the transformation trying to emerge. If you stay present instead of panicking, chaos becomes reorganizing energy. It clears the ground so a more aligned structure can form. The law of identity offering. This law explains why deep change feels heavier than simple habit building. Every major shift in life demands that an old identity be released, not just an old behavior. You can change actions quickly, but if the self-image behind them remains the same, reality eventually snaps back. That's why people say they want change, yet feel internally blocked. The block is the identity still asking to survive. An identity is built from memories, roles, labels, and emotional patterns. It includes how you see yourself, how others recognize you, and what you believe you're allowed to have. When growth threatens that structure, the mind resists because losing an identity feels like losing safety, belonging, or meaning. This is why transformation often comes with discomfort, confusion, or a sense of not knowing who I am anymore. The offering part of this law is crucial. The old identity must be consciously surrendered, not dragged along. That might mean letting go of being the struggling one, the good child, the victim, the spiritual person, or even the strong one. Until that self-definition is released, new opportunities feel unstable or undeserved. Reality mirrors this hesitation by delaying or disrupting progress. This law also explains why people sabotage success right after breakthrough moments. The new reality conflicts with the old self-image, so the psyche unconsciously tries to restore familiarity. When the identity offering is complete, however, effort drops. Actions feel natural, not forced. You're no longer trying to become something, you're operating from it. At that point, change stops being stressful and starts being stable.
That's what's up. And that's the video. Hopefully I can be back later. Go work on some music. Give me some rest again. You know what I'm saying? Then I'll come back in the afternoon, hopefully, if on YouTube not messing up. If not, y'all see me later on throughout the day. But shouts out to everybody coming through. Shouts out to Live and Learn. Shouts out to Pete Moses. About to go check out this track. Jordan just sent me a track, so you already know it's going to be fire. Going on a new project. Make sure y'all check out my new song called No Comparison. You already know what it is. And I'll catch y'all in a minute. Peace. This is Wisdom Wednesdays. Also, Winging It Wednesdays. I'm just doing whatever today. And plus, it's hump day. So catch everybody in a minute. Shouts out to everybody, and everybody's gonna watch it on playback. Catch you on the minute. Peace.